Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode in the Econobox Garage. Well, I'm about to set up the carbs, and you can see I've removed the dash pots off both the front and back one. I've set them aside, making sure not to mix up the cylinder and the cover because they are matched. Now if you notice down right in here, this is where the needle goes in, and that center brass ring moves up and down to richen or lean out the mixture, and the outer brass ring is fixed. Yeah, so the starting point for these is the inner ring is to be flush with the outer ring. And then using this nut here, or turn it down 12 flats or 2 full turns. So I'm going to do that now. I'll show you where that inner ring sits relative to the outer ring. Okay, I've turned this down the 12 flats or 2 full turns on the lower nut. And you can see right there that that inner ring has dropped relative to the outer ring. So I'll just do that on the other carb, and then that way I know I'm on the same starting point for both. Now you can use a wrench, but usually you can do this with your with fingers as well. So I'm just going to do that on this one, and then those will be in the same position. That'll be a good starting point to do the fine tuning and synchronizing the carburetors. So here is the dash pot, and you can see the needle on there, and that goes into the center hole, and it's spring loaded, so it I don't have to worry about centering it, so it's self-centered. And there is, if you look on just inside here, there's a little brass tab, and that lines up with there's a notch, and you can see the notch right there. That brass tab goes into that notch. It stops that from spinning around. So I'll get the other two, or I'll get the other dash pot and needle, and then the covers on, and we'll get on to the next step. So here we have the covers and the springs that go in, and I've kept them for rear and front. So first of all, the spring, well, let's do the front one. It's a little easier to see because the choke cable is not in the way. So put the spring on, it goes on right there, and then the cover goes on like so. And I'm just lining that up. I'm just lining that up with the, there we go. Just don't force it down too hard. You want to make sure that so that's still good. So I'll just put the screws in there, and then I'll put the little plunger that'll go back in, and then I will get everything screwed up, and then we can get to the next, and then we'll get to tuning up the carburetors. Well, I have my fuel line sorted out between the two carburetors, and the positive crankcase ventilation system goes into the ports on the side of each carb. Now I need to figure out a vacuum source for the distributor. Now these carbs are not the original ones that came in this car, and there is no provision for a vacuum port on either of these carbs. What I'm going to do is take this bolt here, which plugs this hole, and tap it for a hose barb. So that'll give me manifold vacuum for the distributor. Perhaps not ideal, because normally a vacuum port would be down right about there on the carburetors, but the later ones, such as these, didn't have that. I'm going to drill this for a 10-32 thread, and then I'll pick up a hose barb for that, and that way I can run from the manifold to the distributor to get the vacuum I need. And there we have that bolt drilled and tapped for a 10-32 hose barb. So now that I have my little vacuum fitting there, I'm just going to switch over and work on the choke cable. Now I have to shorten this one about 12 inches. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to pull the actual cable out of the housing. Then I'll cut the housing, and I'm going to attempt to reuse this end bit because I know that that does fit right in the spot on the back carburetor. Well, I have the cable shortened, and what I did is I cut the casing and then dug the stub end of what was left out of this end bit, used a drill bit to reopen it, and I just happened to have the right crimping tool to re-crimp that on the end there. I just used my Dremel with a little cutoff wheel to cut the end, or cut the cable itself, and it makes a nice, I don't know if you can see that, but it makes a nice clean cut. I have my little fitting on there, and the choke mechanism works quite nicely. Next up is going to be putting in the springs and hooking up the throttle cable. The piece I ordered that I thought was the right one to connect the cable to the linkage is actually not the correct one. I'll have to see if I can find the correct one so I can actually put it all together. In the meantime, I'm going to put the 3 springs on. There's one that goes on the throttle linkage part directly, and then there's, it's kind of hard to see and get a picture in here, but right there, I'll see if I can get a, so there's 3 springs that go in there. They go into the 3 holes at the bottom of the heat shield, and there's one that goes on this side and one that goes on the other side. So here's one of the return springs, and on all 3 of them the hooks on either end are shaped a little differently. So this end here, which has a little bit of a return on it, I think that's the easiest, that's how I would describe it anyway. That end goes into the heat shield at the bottom, and then this hooks, the other end, more of a straight hook, hooks onto the linkage. Well, there I have the 3 springs installed where they're supposed to go, and you can see up in the top here it hooks into the linkage on the one side. The middle one hooks into this middle part right here, and then the crooked hook, as I pointed out a minute ago, is into the bottom of the, hooks into the bottom of the heat shield. And so I think I have the wiring all finished up. All these connections are made here. All the connections are made up here. The flasher's in. I have my oil line run. I have my vacuum line run to the new port on the manifold. And if I go around to the other side, so on this side I've got my quick disconnect ready for the battery, and the negative will go, and then this end of the cable will mount to this spot here on the firewall. I have the throttle cable run, and it comes out of the footwell here and over to the top of the heat shield, and you can just see the cable itself going down. Let's see if I can get a shot of it here. Down to right where my finger is there. That's where it's connected to the linkage itself. I have the clutch cable shortened and run, and it attaches right there. I have my velocity stacks from Q1 Classic Engineering installed. They're just held on with some Allen screws. I do have to hook up these vent lines. There's one here on the rear carb and a corresponding one on the front carb. I just have to figure out where I need to route those to. Obviously I would need to avoid the exhaust. I still have to adjust the linkage to make sure everything's as it should be initially, and then there'll be some adjustments to make once I have the car running. All my water lines are run. I do have to seal up the valve cover. It's just sitting loose at the moment, but I'll get that done. And I've got my battery box in place, and I do have to put the plug wires on but I'll get to that a bit later. Now before I can fire the car up, I need to set static timing. So that basically is a base point for where the ignition will fire when you first try and start it up. So the first task of that is to set the car at top dead center. So that means pistons 1 and 4 will be at the top of their cycle, as high up in the cylinder as possible. So to check that, I'm going to pull the spark plugs, and just visibly you should be able to see the top of the piston and the number 1 and number 4 holes, or pardon me, number 1 and number 4 holes. And then from there, I need to make sure that it's the number 1 that is at its ignition stroke. And I'll show you how you can figure that out as well. Okay, pull the spark plugs out. That serves two purposes. I can see in the piston, I can see down the cylinder, and it also makes the engine easier to turn over. And I don't know whether you can see or not, but you can just see the top of the piston in that one. Nothing there, and you can see the top of the piston in that one, that little shiny spot. So I know that 1 and 4 are at very close to top dead center. Now I have checked with the marks on the bottom, the timing marks on the bottom of the crank pulley, but I'll show you that in a minute. Now we're on top. To figure out which of the 2 cylinders is actually in the firing situation, so you can hear there's play on that rocker and play on that rocker, so that tells me both these valves are closed and there's no tension on the valve springs. Where I go to number 4, there's no free play, which tells me that these springs are starting to open, and so therefore it's not on their compression stroke. So I have the engine in the correct spot. So now that I've confirmed the number 1 cylinder is at top dead center and it's the one in the firing position, when I do the timing, or the static timing, adjusting the distributor, I'll know that it's firing, getting ready to fire number 1 piston, and that way I can get everything in the right order. Now this next little bit's going to be a bit of a challenge to show you, but you notice at the bottom here, just in here, there's 3 teeth, if you like. The long tooth marks top dead center, and each of the other 2 teeth, first one is 5 degrees before top dead center and 10 degrees before top dead center. It's really hard to see, but if you do notice, kind of between the 2 short teeth, in the gap there's a little notch in the back of the crankshaft pulley. Now check with my engine builder, and he recommended setting the initial timing at about 8 degrees before top dead center, and we're pretty much right on that. It's probably 7.5 on that, so I'm going to call that good to go, and I can open the bonnet back up and move to the next step. Well, now that I've ensured that I am at top dead center and on the ignition stroke on cylinder 1, I'm going to put the valve cover back on. I've just added some oil to each of the tops of the valves, top of the push rods, and the rocker shaft here, just to help a little bit when we first start it up. So I'll get the rocker cover put back on, and then we'll go to the actual setting of static timing with the distributor, which is way down there. Well, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to share it with your friends. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget that little bell icon. Click on that and you'll get notified when the next video comes out. And then next video, we'll be finishing off putting all the fluids in, bleeding the brakes and clutch, and getting one step closer to getting the car started. I'd like to say thank you to everyone that supported the channel, either through commenting, subscribing, and also hitting that super thanks button. Picking up merchandise such as a shirt, and there's a link to the store in the description below. My name is Ian. This is the Econobox Garage. We'll see you next time.